Welcome back, Pete. We're on the two sides of the table again.
Once again, it's fantastic to be on the other side of the table here, and it's been a cracking week, and I'd love to hear about some of the things that you've been up to over the last week.
Yeah, so we've had a very busy start to February. I think it's we launched the first episode this week, so that's been exciting for us. But one of the things that sparked my interest this week is I listened to one of the latest episodes of Diary of a CEO. I think everyone knows that podcast with Stephen Bartlett. But he interviewed Daniel Priestley again. So his second interview with him. I think the two of them are actually quite good friends. So he interviewed him again, and I highly recommend going and listening to that episode. Daniel brings a lot of his years of business experience to the table and talks about the changes that we're seeing, particularly around we're seeing a shift now from people's business brands into their personal brands and the importance of building that personal brand and attaching your business to that personal brand, which is sort of leads into what we're going to talk about today. So I sometimes find those episodes a little bit long, but I sort of break it up over a few car rides and I can get through them. How about you? How's the start of February been for you?
Yeah, look, an absolute cracking start to February and getting back into event season, which is always good to be out and about, meeting lots of folks, and great to hear a lot of comments about the podcast as well. There's a lot of energy out there amongst IT businesses about what we're doing. But look, I've always been a massive big Jim Collins fan. So, the classic Good to Great is that sort of business Bible about, what are the attributes that make a truly amazing business. And look, there's actually a great short form that Jim actually put out a number of years ago, and that was the flywheel effect. So, if you listen to it on Audible, it's only about 2 hours. If you listen to Good to Great, it's about 25 hours. But, I think that flywheel effect of understanding, what are the key things that actually really move a business forward and what the impact of that is. So the classic analogy being when Jim worked with Amazon, lower prices, create more sales, create more discounts with suppliers, which then creates lower prices. So that flywheel effect that exists inside of every business. So it was good to listen to that again whilst going for some walks earlier this week to just, once again, just think about, in my own business, what is it that flywheel effect directly is.
And you've been in Sri Lanka the last week as well, seeing the team over there.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to maybe be a little bit selfish and see the two test matches and coincide my trip to Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka didn't do quite as well as we would expect. Typically a very spinning wicket down in Galle, but it was good to see that, Steve Smith got his 10,000 runs there and to be part of that amazing experience.
Oh, awesome. Very good. And today we are on to marketing.
Oh, something that I know is near and dear to your heart, that's for sure. And look, we briefly spoke about strategy, and I think I introduced some concepts around creating value in the last podcast. And look, I think strategy is one of those words that's often bandied around and a bit of a dark art, but marketing strategies, I know, is something that many people are really trying to unpack and go, well, I'm building a business strategy. How do I tie in that marketing strategy? So maybe that's a good place for us to start today is then talk about, when you think about a marketing strategy, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a really good place to start because it's actually where we start with our customers. So when we build a marketing strategy, we are usually trying to tweeze out of the business owner or the people in the business, what is it that they want to be famous for? And I know you love that. You love that analogy, and we've talked about it previously. What is it that they want to be famous for? And then what is the plan that we take to get them there? What we find within the TSP market, particularly for MSPs, is they sort of sit there and say, well, we're all the same. There's nothing famous about us. There's nothing different about us. And I really challenge that notion because I think that every MSP is different because of various reasons. It could be the people in the business. It could be the way they do things and their methodology. It could be where they're located. And so tweezing that out and understanding what that unique selling proposition is for them is really part and parcel of that marketing strategy. what campaigns do they want to run for the year? Where do they want to focus? So we may have a new go-to-market that, we need to get out there. How do we plug marketing into that go-to-market strategy and go, we need to be promoting this, getting this out there, building an audience for this, and making sure that strategy follows through for the entire year. What are the other activities as well around that? So what are you going to do from a social media perspective? What are you going to do from a website perspective? How often are you going to publish things? All of this stuff comes into that 12-month marketing plan and the strategic component. The biggest thing though is, how does this marketing strategy align to the business goals? And that's usually one of the first questions we ask is, what are you actually trying to achieve this year?
Yeah, and I think maybe it's worth double clicking on there. You mentioned go to market a couple of times, and look, I think go to market means different things to different people. So how do you see that go to market fitting in? And maybe actually a good place to start is, what is a go to market strategy?
Yeah, so to me, go to market is really around how you take a product or a service to market. Sounds sort of basic to say it like that, but it usually gets sort of, I suppose, put in the marketing camp quite frequently, but it's actually a lot more than marketing, right? So who's going to lead that and push that? Who's going to deliver that? Who's going to build any of the tech that needs to sit around that, or the platforms that need to sit around that? Is it new to the industry? Is it new to your business? How do you balance it with your existing products and go to market? So how do you how does it fit in with something else? It might be new, or it might be an addition. And then what's the marketing strategy behind that go-to-market? So how are we going to push it out? What are the tactical components that we're going to use? And when I say tactical, I mean things like social media, press, all of that kind of stuff.
And I think the interesting thing with go to market is it really includes every part of the business.
Yeah, that's right.
Because there's no point marketing something and then selling something that you've got no chance of delivering successful. So if you're very successful at delivering M365 solutions, you're probably not going to go to market with Google Docs solutions because you're going to set yourself up for failure. But how do you see that pricing fits into go to market? Because I think pricing is often what customers see as a differentiator when they compare MSPs, when they all look the same. So how does pricing fit into that go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, pricing's a good one. I think, sometimes being the lowest price on a go-to-market just because it's a new product is not necessarily the right strategy to take, right? You have to consider everything when it comes to delivering that go-to-market. So whether that's paying for the marketing, paying to set up the service, paying to the staff to actually deliver the service, what does the after-sales support look like? You need to making sure that you're encompassing that into the pricing. And sometimes, particularly if it's a new or bespoke go-to-market, I was chatting with a customer yesterday who's got quite a bespoke solution. They're not going to be the cheapest because their solution takes quite a bit of effort to put into play. So I think using pricing as a differentiator, we've talked about this before, if you're constantly trying to undercut, it's just a race to the bottom. So using that pricing as a differentiator, I don't think is the best solution for MSPs.
Look, I often say if you're looking for a heart surgeon, you're not going to go to the yellow pages and look for the cheapest option there. And I think a good takeaway for anyone that's listening is obviously two sides of the table is your favourite podcast, but there's a great podcast episode from Acquired on Louis Vuitton. And the margins that Louis Vuitton are able to achieve and the prices they're able to achieve are absolutely astronomical. And, my previous office before we moved into Edward Street was in Queen Street, like literally across from the Louis Vuitton shop in Brisbane. And what amazed me is that every lunchtime when I'd walk past, there would be a queue literally lined up to get into that shop there. And, really good to see how they position and use pricing as an ability to then drive, scarcity and demand and a premium directly over their products. Tiffany's another great example that's been able to do that all comes under that LVMH brand. And if you look at the sort of the growth of the LVMH brand, it's very driven around that positioning. And I think go-to-market's often overlooked about that positioning. But back to marketing strategies, I'm sure you've seen the good, the bad, and the absolute ugly.
Yeah.
What are some of the common mistakes that people make with their marketing strategy?
Yeah, with a marketing strategy, it's really around, we spoke about this in the last episode, but around not knowing the numbers and what is required to actually achieve what the strategy is setting out to achieve. So, as I said before, marketing strategy should be aligned to business goals. And what does that marketing strategy, what components of those business goals can that marketing strategy play into? If we don't know those as marketers, if we don't know what those numbers are and what that, opportunity, those opportunity numbers needs to be able to, achieve what you're trying to achieve in your business, we can't write an effective marketing strategy. So knowing that is really important up front. I think not building your audience is another one. So there needs to be, I think, components of your marketing strategy that helps you build that audience. And some of that audience building is going to come in organically. But really what you want to be doing is actually saying, I need to be doing, spending some money on branding and just doing sort of, regular activity that keeps you front of mind for your audience and building that audience. Because what we see this natural attrition happen in marketing with, you're constantly sending to the same list. They're going to get annoyed with you and drop off. So you need to be able to replace those numbers, right? Otherwise your lists are not growing. You're not able to market effectively to new people. So not allowing for that and just thinking that you can constantly market to the same list and not allowing budget for that, I think is a common mistake as well. People are just not going to stay on your list if you're constantly trying to sell them everything.
So what is a marketing strategy? Is it just a PowerPoint deck or what actually is it?
As in, do you mean as in what tech do we use or?
Yeah, like if I want to go away and create myself a marketing strategy, do I just jump on ChatGPT? Do I start with a blank Word document? Like what actually is it and how do I get it through everyone in my business?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And look, you could jump on ChatGPT and feed it a couple of things and let it spit out a marketing strategy for you. But I think that I would challenge that notion in saying, has your business goals been considered in that marketing strategy? Because anyone can do a marketing strategy, quote unquote, that says, we need to do 30 social media posts a month and 3 blog posts a month and all of that. And while that level of detail is important, it's not really what it's about. It should really be about what are the activities that we're going to do? What do we want to be famous for? What campaigns do we want to run? What vendors do we want to align to if we're talking about it from a TSP perspective? Where do we want to involve them? What's the budget? So you're actually starting to plug in different components of your business into that marketing strategy. And what I find really effective is that once you've sort of got, a good draft of that occurred, is feeding that to those components of the business that it may affect. So you might have a vendor relationship manager. You might have, finance, your CFO. You might have a CRM manager. You need to actually bring them into the fold and go, what can and can't we do? Because your CFO is probably going to have a really clear understanding of this is your marketing budget, or saying to them, we want this amount of money, getting them on board and showing the results. I think it's also important to show what those potential results could be as well. So, if we're going to invest $10,000, we want to be getting $100,000 back at the end of it. So showing that, and that's something we're really clear with our customers, is saying, if you want this, this is how much it's going to cost you.
And I think that's one of the challenges that many businesses face, especially technology businesses, is being able to measure that ROI. Like they've invested $100,000 and seen nothing to show for it. And it sounds to me that really that audience is key and knowing who your audience is and being able to target it.
Yeah, definitely. So audience building is really important and showing value to that audience. I did a LinkedIn video about this a couple of weeks ago, just around making sure that your marketing isn't always about selling. It's about making sure that you're showing value and educating your customer and your audience. So there's the audience building component, there's the consideration phase, we call it. So there's the awareness, the consideration phase, and then there's that conversion phase. So that consideration phase is, you've got the audience on the hook, how do you add value without trying to sell them something? And it's sort of a funnel if you turn it on its side, but like how do you push them down that marketing funnel till they become an opportunity. But you need to make sure that you're adding value across all three levels, some more than others.
Yeah, and the whole concept of building an audience really hit home to me at the SMB IT conference in Melbourne back in October. So, SMB IT runs a wonderful conference, and on night one, it's an opportunity for everyone to come together and have dinner. And on that night, it was the Friday night. I remember, sitting next to a colleague and having a great chat, and all of a sudden, Metallica tickets got released.
Ah.
And literally, by the time the bottle of wine on the table was finished, Metallica tickets had sold out. And I remember 20 years ago going and seeing Metallica at Festival Hall in Brisbane, and like literally probably 1,500 people in that room, in that audience. 20 years later, they're filling up Suncorp Stadium instantly. So that, I think, it takes time to build that audience and build that engaged community. What are the tips that people should be doing? Maybe they're not going to sell out Suncorp Stadium, but what are the tips do you think that technology businesses should be doing to build that audience?
Yeah, it comes back to that value, right? It's about how do you provide that value. So giving them so I'm about to release something on a concept called the playground method, and some people refer to it as the messy middle when it comes to marketing. It's quite a new concept, only sort of got published last year. I'm about to sort of rejig it in my words and release it. So shameless plug there. But what you need to be doing is actually the theory is you actually need to be giving people an opportunity to interact with your brand on multiple different levels or multiple pieces of playground equipment. So, and you need to be adding value at every step, right? So you need to let customers enter the playground. They need to play around with various different things. So that could be, they read a blog post, they listen to a podcast, they watch a video testimonial with one of your current customers, all of those different methods. Because we've seen marketing funnels sort of die over the last couple of years because people know that they're getting pushed down the funnel now. They know they're being directed to a sale. And now what we're seeing, and that was created back in the 60s or even the 50s, I think it was, and that was because technology wasn't what it is today. People sort of they'd interact with your brand once and they'd never see you again, or they were afraid they'd never see you again. So they would give you their information. And I think back in the day, it would have been like a phone number or even a mailing address or something like that. So you could continuously interact with them. You might send them something in the letterbox, and you might give them a call or sell them penny stocks or something like that. But now people are more aware than ever that they're being pushed down a funnel. So it's really important that we give them value in the playground. So by giving them those things to interact with, they can then exit the playground and signal intent to buy. So I forgot what our original question was. It's how do you build that audience? But creating those different pieces of playground equipment, let's quote unquote, is really important as a brand, because you need to give your customers at various different stages opportunities to play with your brand.
Be good to maybe pull on that thread a little bit of brand, because often I think people confuse branding with marketing. And where does branding fit into a marketing strategy?
Branding is still really important, right? So branding is, who are you as a business? What is your point of difference? What is your look and feel? It's almost like sits across the top of all of your marketing. It's almost like that umbrella, because you wouldn't go out of the bounds of your marketing. Out of your branding. You wouldn't publish something green when your colours are purple, for example, just using that as an example. So that's really important for that consistency in your marketing material. But then your marketing material and your marketing is really about how you drive people to sales and drive leads and drive revenue.
Yeah, look, branding's interesting because I think it's more than just a logo on a billboard or a sticker on the back of a car. Look, I always think about hotels, like whether you're staying in a Marriott hotel or a Hyatt hotel or a Hilton hotel, they're all basically the same.
Yeah.
But imagine if Nike opened up a hotel. You'd know exactly what that feels like from their brand and the interactions and the way that they present themselves in market there, that it would have a particular feel, a particular identity that goes along with that. And So when you think about brand, do you think that that's really what many technology businesses are missing, creating that individual identity that really differentiates them? And I think, maybe to sort of, Seth Godin used the classic term, the purple cow,
Yep.
because it stands out. When you're driving along the road and you see a bunch of cows, you don't look, but if you saw a purple one, you'd stop and probably take photos and maybe put it even on TikTok for those younger generations. So you think that technology businesses miss out on that branding piece?
I do, and that's why we pull out that USP and that branding and what's your point of difference around when we're doing the strategies, because I think that we've sort of been in the last, let's say, 20 years, we've been in this sort of almost like, I guess, a bit of a daze around, so many MSPs and technology service providers have come up and they've missed that opportunity to differentiate themselves. So, and you can do that in so many different ways. Like I look at Digital Team, it's the orange jacket. We look for the orange jacket at the conferences and things like that. I think the question I would say to our listeners is, how are you differentiating your business? And that can be through culture. You can, showcase your culture. You can do some really significant branding, and I mean, like color branding, logos and things like that. You can do, you can completely go sideways in your service delivery and do something completely different. But how do you carve out your piece of that, I guess, market that becomes your brand?
And it sounds like to me, really the opportunity is, how do you build a tribe? Like your people, those raving fans, those organisations that really, are you a Puma guy, an Adidas guy, or a Nike guy? Like, who are your fans and who are you really associate with there? And I think one of the things that I've seen is that MSPs try to be everything to everyone. And is that the experience that you're seeing as you're
100%.
building those marketing strategies?
Yeah, 100%, exactly. So we're trying to, and that's essentially what we're trying to do, is to help our customers really carve out what that differentiator is for them, because we've heard it out of our customers' mouths is, I'm just the same as everyone else. And like I said, I really challenge that notion, because I don't think that is the case, because there is opportunity to carve out, so many different ways and means of being different.
Yeah, so if I'm a technology business, maybe I've got my podcast in while I'm doing my shopping at Coles or out going for a walk, and when I get back in front of my laptop, what are the things that you think they should be doing as they start to think about marketing and building a marketing strategy?
Yeah, so engage Inception to begin with. But no, I think have a think about what that differentiator could potentially be for you. Have a think about what sets you apart, and don't tell us that it's your people, because everyone tells us that they've got the best people and the best service delivery. Think about something outside of the box. And if you're really not sure, start to list out some ways in which you think you could be different. So you may not be doing them currently, but think about ways you could be different and where you maybe want to move to. If you want to understand, your marketing, if you want to build out a wider marketing strategy, I think start looking at those numbers. So have a look at, what do you want to see from a return on investment perspective? What do you want to see? How much do you want to grow this year? And, be realistic in that number. And how many deals is that going to take to cover that number? So from there, you can work backwards and go, I close 70% of deals that come across the table. So, I need, 70 deals to get 7 or something like that. That was really bad maths. I'm not a maths girl. But, work back up the funnel from there. And that's where you can use things like AI and stuff like that to help you sort of do that funnel quite quickly. Because that's just simple maths that I can't get. But
as the person that did maths at university, I was wondering where you were going with that calculation there. But talking about numbers, like, what's the number that we should be budgeting? So, many organisations are starting to think about what their budgets look like for FY26. What's the magic number? Is it 20% of revenue? Is it nothing? Like, what is it that people should be thinking about that they carve out as a marketing budget?
How long is a piece of string? A piece of string can be any length, right? So it's the same thing for your marketing budget. My philosophy with marketing is that if you're putting money in and it's working and you're seeing a return on investment, you put more money in. So the you need to have a look. I think my view is you need to have a look at what are you seeing as a return on investment so far? What has and hasn't worked? Where are you willing to invest more? What's the plan moving forward? How many deals do you need? What's your close rate? All of that, all of those numbers that we've spoken about previously, to be able to pull a remotely relevant number together. I would even say add some more on top of that, because like I said before, you need to allow for things like branding. You need to allow for things, events, stuff like that you might want to attend. And I'm not saying that you don't budget for that in the strategy and you write that in. You certainly do. But usually we find that these things tend to blow out a little bit. So adding some buffer in there, I think, is a really key element. So to answer your question, there isn't a magic number. Like, I'm not just going to sit here and say put $100,000 a year into marketing, because you need to take into account what isn't working. How fast you want to run is really important as well. We work with a lot of customers who we have a set package and a set packages, and those packages are sort of like, your bronze, silver, gold. Let's think your gold one is going to make you run a lot faster than your bronze one, but it doesn't mean you can't do your bronze one, for example. So all of these things you need to consider.
Yeah, so some of the numbers that I've heard sort of bandied around is, organisations that are sort of just in BAU, that marketing budget should be about 3% of revenue. And for those organisations that are looking for high growth, that's 10% of revenue there. And I think, when you say 10% of revenue for marketing, I think, often a lot of people actually almost cringe in regards to that. But it sounds like from what I'm hearing is with the right strategy, it's about successful execution and really thinking about marketing as an investment. And back to the Metallica, it's taken them a long time to build that audience. And I often think about that marketing's almost like compound interest.
Yeah.
You've got to start to make and lay down something today in order to be able to then gain the fruits in the future. Have you seen any organisations that have done that well, as sort of lay that pathway down and are now reaping the rewards from that?
Yeah, we've been working with a couple of customers now for well over 12 months. And when we started with them, there was no pre-existing audience. There was no sort of USP, any of that. So we sort of have been using that last, let's say 12 months. It's been longer, but that 12 months to really help them build that. And like we spoke about in our previous episode, that sales cycle takes a while, right? So now we're at the point where we're seeing, appointment setting and things like that coming into play, because that's the next logical step for them to be able to start to convert those leads that have been generated. So we are now seeing some of those meetings come to fruition. We're seeing, the fruits of that value-adding execution coming to fruition and actually converting into actual opportunities.
So I'm a numbers guy. I always think about things in numbers. And, I've been recently introduced to TikTok, and I found out that viral on TikTok is more than 100,000 views on TikTok. So is there a target number of people that I should have in my audience? Is that if I want LinkedIn followers, how many LinkedIn followers should I have? If I'm sending EDMs, how many people should I have in my newsletter database? Is there magic numbers that you think people should be trying to target?
No, I think it's really about thinking about, again, it comes back to that deal size. It comes back to that pipeline coverage. It comes back to how much money you want to make this year and working backwards from those numbers. I do the calculations all the time on this during our discovery phase. So, if you want to make $600,000, I did this calculation the other day. If the customer wanted to make an extra $600,000 a year, they needed 72 marketing qualified leads for the year to get them there. So, and then that I think we worked up to around, I think it was 700 just general leads or people that needed to interact with them. So there is no magic number about you have to have 500 people in your database, because you could have 500 people and only 5 of those people are actually customers that are willing to buy, but you could have 500 people and all 500 of those people are willing to buy. It's about the richness of that data. So you can magically come up with those numbers, but you need to understand that there's a wider picture around here. As a business owner, you need to understand what your wider picture looks like and what the numbers you're trying to achieve are.
Well, that's great because I thought I had to be like the Beast or Kim Kardashian and have millions and millions of followers in order to be successful there. So look, that's been really insightful for me because there's always things that I take away when I hear you talk about marketing around and I think the key thing for me is just focusing on knowing who my audience is.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I then go and have a message that then resonates directly with that? So,
Yep.
yeah, definitely something that I'm going to take away as a key takeaway from this podcast.
Yeah, but don't sit there and pretend like you don't know anything as well, Pete. You've obviously run two now very successful businesses, or more than that, and marketing, like I've said in our intro episode, you gave marketing quite a lot of freedom in the past, and there's a reason for that. Why?
I think marketing's often an experiment. You've got to try different things because when you've got an audience, there'll be some things that resonate really well and some things that don't resonate. And it's then just experimenting and constantly refining that directly over time. And look, we certainly don't do it perfectly, and it's still a learning experience for us along the way in regards to that. But one of the things is tying that back to attribution. So understanding that we're doing something here in this particular channel, it's giving us that outcome and being able to measure it. And there's certain things that we do that have no outcome. Guess what? We're probably not going to do it again.
Yeah.
But where we see that we're getting success, we'll then, a little bit more, and continue to grow and continue to build on that.
See where that, I guess, that line is, because there is, I think you can tip lots of money into different things, and it doesn't mean that that's always, where all your money should be going. I think you're right. And I think, again, that single pane of glass, making sure you can see how that attribution has resulted in that acquisition of a customer, making sure that that's really clear, I think is really important as well. And I think, what you're talking about, it being experimentation, there is an element of that. And I think that's why, you do need to add that, almost that buffer to your budget to be able to give you that experimentation budget in a term.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think, often it's understanding what sticks and then being able to then get that insight. And I think often there are things, especially around branding, that are very, very hard to measure.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely some things that you can't measure, and often, it's really hard, I think, to, we went through a logo redesign at MOQ, but it's really hard to measure that type of investment, right? Because that was just about us shifting into the next generation. That's not really going to result in sales. And I think that's a really important thing to call out, is that sometimes you're going to spend money on things that are about getting those foundations right and are not necessarily going to result in revenue marketing or revenue into your business. And then there are times where you're going to be spending 80% of your budget on revenue marketing, and you want to see that producing revenue in your business.
And it's interesting because those opportunities come from different places. One of the things that I've always done is always have a sticker on the back of my laptop with branding. So I travel quite a bit, so I'll be sitting in airport lounges and various different places. And I remember a number of years ago sitting in the Qantas Club and had the Wardy IT sticker on the back, and someone had obviously gone and Googled and said, what does this Wardy IT business do? And literally came up to me and said, we've got some database challenges. Can you help us with that? So it's really then understanding, well, guess what? I had success with that. So all of our laptops now have stickers on it, even in the digital team business. So it's then just seeing what actually drives that outcome.
Yeah, definitely. And that's funny, because that is a branding. I would consider that a branding, but it actually resulted in something for you. So it is interesting sometimes how things work. And I think marketing is considered a bit of a dark art sometimes, and it is, what do I put in a marketing strategy and things like that. So I think that's why it's really important to have those measurable outcomes and making sure, because, as a business owner, if you're employing someone who's doing marketing, or you've got a business that you're working with who does marketing, at the end of the day, the way you're going to measure the success of that person or the KPIs of that person is, have they delivered what they said they're going to do? So making sure that you've got those clear, you're very clear on what that is as the business owner, so you can hold that team to account.
Yeah, and not to put you on the spot, Kayla, but what differentiates Inception Marketing?
The biggest differentiator for us is that we specialise only in the TSP industry. That's all we do. We don't really go out of that space. But the other thing is that we deeply embed ourselves with our customers. So we become part of their team. A lot of the time as our customers bring us into the fold in executive team meetings, we go and sit in their office, once to a couple of times a month. We attend events with them as well. I was recently fortunate enough to go overseas with a customer to attend an event to support them on. So those are our key differentiators, is that we actually act like we're part of their business, but we're outsourced.
One of the things I saw on LinkedIn is you even go and look at event spaces as well for customers as well. And I thought, how do I get that as a job to be able to go and try different restaurants and different places like that?
Some of the perks.
As part of that. But look, I love the answer that you gave. I've always been a fan on just do one thing and do it incredibly well. And if you look at a general practitioner versus a specialist, you'd wait for months to see an ear, nose and throat specialist or a podiatrist or that specialist capability. But guess what? They charge you a premium for it directly as well. And that's because they're so good at that and they're known for that. So, yeah, I think, we spoke about in a previous episode, what are you famous for? And I love your answer about being, really specialised. And I think that's a really good takeaway for everyone to think about is who is their audience? How do they resonate with that? Because guess what? Metallica was never going to sell any tickets to my mum, but I would love to have been there.
That's it. And what about digital team?
Yeah, so digital team from a marketing perspective is really interesting with what we're doing because we've got two customers.
You do.
So one of our customers is directly our customers that we deliver our services for, but we also need to attract the top of the funnel for talent as well. And we see that as our other customer. And it's interesting because we're not only advertising across different geos, all of our talent's located in Sri Lanka. So our messaging needs to be slightly different because it's targeting individuals, whether that's data engineers or L3 engineers. And then we also then need to think about, we've got three types of customers that we deliver services to. There's our classic MSP and TSPs. We've got our SIs or our solution implementers or system integrators, depending on we spoke about which side of the fence you're on. And we've also got startups and ISVs, so software development businesses as well. So although we specialise in delivering just services to IT businesses, we've got three audiences in that, plus our talent that we're trying to bring into the business as well. So we're early on in that journey and finding out what works, what doesn't work. I briefly joked about TikTok before, and TikTok's really about our talent because they're in that demographic. Me, I don't get TikTok. I'm not very good at dancing, but it definitely resonates with a particular audience there. So I think understanding what resonates with that audience is super key. I was very resistant to TikTok, but I'm glad we did it because it works for that market.
And now you're viral.
100%. So, more than 100,000 views is considered to be viral. And one of our videos is, I think, over 350,000 now.
Yeah, amazing. I can't wait to see the dancing team members on the TikTok.
They do an amazing job with their dancing, that's for sure.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Pete. I really enjoyed that episode for obvious reasons. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, something near and dear to your heart there from a marketing perspective. But look, I think, great takeaway is get some advice, get someone to have a look at this strategy. Doesn't necessarily have to be, someone that's external. Maybe it's just another colleague or peer that you're then running that through just to sanity check. So once again, Carla, great to be on the other side of the table as part of the podcast and looking forward to the next episode. So once again, we love all of the feedback and that drives the topics that we then present. So thanks, team.
Thanks, everyone.